Hello, my warriors. Today we are going to be doing a chapter 35. This is the King of the North Sea. And to that effort and for that purpose, I here shall read for you. The dawn lighted on what felt like a good day. Hvitbjorn sat at the base of a tree, drinking good, clean river water as his warriors all slept still in the dawn's early light. They'd taken back in Norway for a week now and were ready to resume their campaigns on the warring kings. The crisp scent of snow filled his awareness, and he looked out through the trees at the growing light. All was dark wood and brightening snow and gray sky. He watched as he'd had the last sentry duty this night, and it would be his privilege to wake the rest of the camp when the sun was strong enough through the cloud. The sentries were never allowed fires, so as not to alert any scouts, and so he lay within the warmth of his great white cloak and another warm brown fur over this. He lay there in the cool morning air and listened to the stillness of the forest. Before him lay a small pond, still frozen over completely. The whole surface was a thin layer of perfectly unbroken snow, white, that shone brighter than all the forest around it. The contrast of the brightness of the snow with the dark blue black of the forest was beautiful. Then there before him he saw a gray shape step out of the trees from his left and pad silently onto the frozen water, sniffing the snow as it went. Hvitbjorn carefully turned his head to watch it, for he, at first, could hardly believe his peripheral was seeing true. There on the ice was a large wolf, a wolf that made others of its kind look like mere dogs. The wolf was of such a profoundly dark gray that it should look pure black in the night. Its shoulders must have come up to his waist, and its head could easily have reached up to meet his face. Subtle cracks sounded from beneath the beast as it silently stalked across the surface. The wolf sniffed the air and looked around, its keen hunter eyes missing nothing. It saw Hvitbjorn then, who sat at the base of a tree not 20 paces away. He knew how to get his hand to the sword handle, but stayed himself and just sat there in total silence. He stared. They stared at each other for a long moment. A crack broke the still calm, and the wolf flinched low. A short whistling noise filling the air, and Hvitbjorn knew it had been a bow. He watched as the impossibly fast shape of the arrow passed from his right through the trees and landed in the wolf's chest with a thump. It yelped in surprise and pain and dropped, sliding along the ice to the center of the pond. Now Hvitbjorn raced to action and threw aside the furs so he could stand. Perfect shot! Someone that he could not see said. What? Who is there? He asked, drawing the steel. It is I! Eric said as he came around a tree and stood tall and proud with a long bow in his hand. Oh, Lord Whitebear, he said, the disappointment clear in his voice. Why? Why? That's gonna make a fine cloak, isn't it? It is. You saw the size of it. It was. He turned back to the creature that was still trying to stand. Beautiful. Calling the men. The rise will be soon. Maybe you can go and get on that. Hvitbjorn looked back at the man. You do not command me, Eric. The man stood in a distinctly antagonistic posture. The fact that he still held the bow was not lost on Hvitbjorn. He walked over to him, however, and turned away from him to look down the range of the shot and to the laying wolf. It's still breathing, he said. Not going anywhere, though. I think I got its spine. with that. He's mine. For some reason, a terrible sadness overtook Hvitbjorn as he looked at the great dying animal. It deserved better, Eric scoffed. It will be honored to be my cloak. Eric walked around Hvitbjorn and down the small slope to the ice where he carefully walked out and marred the snow surface there. The ice is going to break, Hvitbjorn said. The man crouched and cautiously walked his way along the water. If the ice could bear the weight of a beast, then I would be fine, he said, sliding each foot delicately forward. Eric reached the wolf and drew his dagger. The ragged breathing of the animal had slowed, but he still knelt and drove the blade down to the hilt in its chest. Try get back here. Don't try and cut it up there. Yes, obviously. Eric then froze. A deep, thunderous, resonant note rang through the ice sheet. Come back now, Hvitbjorn said urgently. Eric turned carefully and looked Hvitbjorn straight in the eye. And then the ice beneath him and the wolf split, and he fell straight down with a heavy creature right into the water. A large portion of the ice gave way beneath them, and then floated to resume its position, its place in the hole they'd made. Eric! Hvitbjorn shouted and took his axe from where it rested against the tree. Without thinking of it, he charged out onto the ice and stopped just on the edge of where the man had fallen in. He frantically looked down at the clean, black slab of ice, hoping for any sign of Eric. As he searched, he was aware of the cracks he heard beneath him, but he didn't care, though he knew that with one break would come more. He needed to save the man. Making a decision, he raised his axe and brought down a mighty blow onto the disturbed ice. Dishearteningly, the axe head bounced up as if no strike had occurred. Not that easy, he grunted and brought the axe down again. Once again, the axe just bounced up. He wondered a moment if he'd chip the steel before making an impression in the sheet here. He swung again, and this time it sunk in, and quickly he pulled it free to swing again. And he needed to work faster. He swung again, and the blade bit deep into the ice deeper. He lifted and had a strange moment's hesitation. If he cut through, what if he hit the man with the blade? This hesitation lasted only an instant, as he knew he needed to free the man now. On this strike, the flow split right down the middle, as if it had never presented a challenge to his steel. He reversed the axe head and then struck with the blunt back of the head and pushed the small ice pieces to shards. Smashed. All this taking so damn long. Then he knelt down, placing his right hand with the axe clumsily over the ice for balance. He reached down with his left into the water. The pain from the cold was shocking, and he worried that he wouldn't be able to feel the man, even if he did touch him. But fortunately for Eric, he'd not drifted much under the water, and soon his head collided with Hvitbjorn's hand. Hvitbjorn grabbed a huge handful of the man's hair and heaved up. Eric's head appeared from the black-blue water, and his arms came up with it. He was sputtering and flailing, but Hvitbjorn held strong. Help! Help! Eric said. Here, take this! He offered the axe haft, but the man couldn't think straight. Hvitbjorn released his hair and grabbed the collar of his shirt, then heaved up. Eric slid from the water like a fish and came to rest on the ice, panting and thrashing weakly. They drag-walked across the ice to the bank, and Hvitbjorn attempted to lift Eric to standing, but he remained huddled, shivering. Too damn cold. I know. We need to get to a fire with dry clothes. This is good mead. Cold! I know. Come on up. I will carry you if I have to, but I really don't want to. Eric slumped with a heavy shiver. God damn it! He took the man's arm over his own neck and carried him up the small incline. There wasn't a long way to the camp, but every step was a struggle, and Hvitbjorn was getting wet by holding the man. Lord, asked Olaf, seeing him stagger toward them through the trees. Yes, come and help me. You have the fire going. Good. Eric fell into the water. The camp ahead of them was well hidden in among the forest. The gray and tan canvas of the tents blended well into the dark of the trees. Olaf stood from the fire he'd been sitting by and ran over to the pair of men. He took Eric's other arm and they brought him to the fire together. Lord, I've seen cut like this before. He needs to be warmed slow or he'll burn. I would like to burn, Eric said. Hvitbjorn and Olaf laughed. Well, we'll get you healthy, as we should no matter. We need to get him out of the wet clothes, though. They're freezing on him already. Eric dropped to his knees by the fire and nearly put both hands into the flames. He still shivered violently, but his breathing was steadying. How long was he in the water? Too long. He went under the ice. Eric then shrugged the heavy bear fur off from over his head and pulled the front of the wool shirt away from his chest. I could see the ice over me. It refroze in place and I was stuck. He looked up at Hvitbjorn. You broke the ice like you were chopping wood. You saved me. The ice did not freeze again. I did what I could, and I'm glad I got you out. No, Eric said through another shiver. I heard the ice split, and there was your hand. You saved me. You're my warrior. I'd never let you die. Eric was helped out of the shirt and had a warm woolen cloak put over his shoulders. He then unbelted his breeches and took them off with his shoes and foot wraps. He sat there naked under the cloak for a time, his hands tentatively getting close to the fire to resume the feeling in them. Olaf, find someone to take the southern watch. There's a good pond I was sitting by watching. I don't know that we need to, Lord. Olaf looked out over the rest of the camp. They're waking. We could probably just take down the day and be ready to move. Hvitbjorn pursed his lips and made a thoughtful noise. They'd been at this camp for 2 days now, hunting the game in the surrounding forests, and he worried they may have made too much presence here. He ordered that they get moving today, but he didn't want to have any part of the perimeter without watch, though it was growing lighter. Is there any warm tea? Asked Eric. Aye. Here, have some of this, Ragnar said, walking up to them. He held out a wooden cup for the man to take. Bloody hell, laddie. What'd you go swimming for? Shut up, Eric stammered. Ragnar laughed. What's all this? Asked Stephanos, approaching them with Harold walking in his usual limp. Oh, this daffy bastard's gone and went for a dip in yon pond there. Why do I know what you said? Asked Stephanos. You know what he said? Asked Harold. Then you can translate for the rest of us, he asked with his arms out wide, and all laughed with him. Harket, Hvitbjorn called. Aye, Lord, asked the warrior woman. Go down the way and watch by the side of the lake. No one's on watch there now. That needed? Asked Ragnar. We're all awoken now, and we're soon to be on the move. I hope it isn't needed, but it should be done. Praise God, then you didn't ask me to go. You wouldn't have gone if I asked, quipped Stephanos, the burly Greek stretching tall as the others laughed with him and at Ragnar. They sat for a time longer, drinking hot tea and eating some provisions for their breakfast. Around the fire, Niels came and they shared in laughter, and for that last morning, all seemed well with them. The shouting started from the east just as they were preparing to set themselves to moving camp. It was near mid-morning by then, and each were ready to move out. The warning cry sounded in the distance, and the whole camp stood and prepared for anything, as they had been for months. What's all the ruckus coming? Asked Ragnar. Something's out there, Niels said, standing and putting a hand to the sword at his belt. An eerie quiet fell over the camp, broken only by the distant shouts and screams. That is battle sound, Stephanos said. There is war. Dwarves! Hvitbjorn shouted, finally shaking the shock off and coming to his senses. Spears and shields! Ready to arm! Sword and axe! The warriors around him reached for their weaponry, but no one wore their armor. There'd been no need to. Laddie, we need to run from this place! An arrow cut through the air and landed in a tent side. We're nae wearing our armor! Then shields will be our armor! Hvitbjorn responded. We run and we get cut down. We have to stand and we have to fight here. Who is it that's attacking? Asked Harold. Who cares? We need to counter them now, shouted Olaf. Hvitbjorn turned to him to rebuke the idea, and an arrow plunged into Olaf's head from the right side and sent him plummeting to the ground. Olaf! Harold screamed and ran to his friend's body. No, no! Shields! The large Sven said, running up to the group around the fire. Lord Hvitbjorn, we need to get out of here. You need to. We'll cover the escape. I'm not leaving you, Hvitbjorn shouted back angrily. It's lost. It's lost. We're nae even wearing our bloody armor. We have to get clear, laddie. They didn't seem to be asking for captains or surrender at all. I don't care. I can't just leave them here. Then we retreat all together. No, Harold shouted. He stood and grabbed the nearest weapon he could see and turned to the place where the arrows had come from. Hvitbjorn saw not Harold, the friend he'd come to love like a brother. He saw a berserker changed in Hamra, a berserker who held Hvitbjorn's axe. Harold let out a shriek of rage and utter suffering and charged toward the enemy, and Hvitbjorn watched his axe go with him. He ran without the limp, and Harold had struggled for years, and bore down the enemy fast. Wait! He shouted. Lord, we go now, Stephanos yelled. Harold arrived at the press of the enemy. They'd yet to form a coherent shield line, and so he began to lay into them with the great powerful axe of the white bear. Hvitbjorn and Stephanos and Niels watched in awe as Harold fought brilliantly. He slaughtered man after man with horrific brutality, his strikes ripping through the air in a whirlwind of death. My axe! It's beautiful. I've never seen anyone else fight with it. That's my axe! Lord, we have to go, Niels said, turning from the reverie of watching Harold fight. Hvitbjorn turned and saw another man shaking himself awake, and the spirit of the Ulfhednar overcame him, and he sprinted to attack. And the Ulfhednar twisted and danced and struck like a savage warrior. As he looked, he saw others of his warriors changing thus, making their hamra into beasts and flinging themselves at the enemy. He was too stunned to move or run, and only stayed staring at them as they fought and fell to the overwhelming odd. Harold sliced left with his axe and chopped a man so far into his midsection that he almost cut him in half. An enemy warrior then rushed up and stabbed with a spear that Harold turned swiftly and took in his shoulder. He then took a haft to hold and then struck out with the axe, decapitating the man. In his momentary distraction, another took the opportunity and stabbed him through the belly with a sword. Harold turned to look at the man with more curiosity than anything, though the fury of war still burned in his face. He swung the axe back and aimed straight for the man's face, but his enemy managed to pull the sword from his belly and to bring it up to block the blow some. The axe head blade still cut a deep gash in the man's face and sent him retreating in shock and pain. As Harold stepped to take further advantage of the man's disorientation, an arrow slammed into his neck and sent him to the ground. Gasping, Harold used Hvitbjorn's axe to help himself to stand and resume his fighting posture. Lastly, an enemy man ran up and stabbed him through with a spear. And the look of pain and disbelief on Harold's face overtook the rage. He stood there a moment, choking on the arrow still through his neck and contemplating his plight. The rage returned, and he mustered as much of a scream as his body could manage and brought the axe down into the spearman's neck. Harold stood a moment over the felled enemies around him, then dropped to his knees and toppled forward over the death he'd wrought. A warrior ran past the dead man as Hvitbjorn watched the place his father's axe had fallen. Lord, we need to go! Niels shouted, drawing his sword. Hvitbjorn didn't hear him. The enemy who'd been sliced across the face so viciously crawled over to where the axe lay and lifted it from the ground, admiring his prize with reverence and awe. Hvitbjorn was standing and ready to run and slaughter the man who held his father's sacred weapon. Stephanos, however, put an arm around his shoulders and held him. Him dead! You can't help. Hvitbjorn looked around again at the total ruin of his army, everyone running to fight and many dying. We go now. We have horse. They were slowly backing from the fire as the other warriors went forward to meet the foe he was being backed away from. Excuse me. I should fight, he thought. I have to kill them. A warrior broke past a press of shields and ran for the small group that was backing away from the main body of the fighting. He struck out with a sword, and Niels caught it with his own. Lord, run! No, he shouted. I won't leave you. The enemy man reset his sword over his shield and struck out again. This time, Niels was stepping back, and the sword tip sliced through a part of his forearm, and he screamed at the pain and dropped his sword. This, more than anything else, shocked Hvitbjorn awake from his stunned immobility, and he drew his own sword and struck down the man in one perfect movement. Niels, let's go. He took the man's shoulder and ready to pull him away but he was more than capable of doing so on his own. An arrow soared past them and buried itself into a tree with a loud crack. That noise blended in with a howl, and they saw Eric standing from the place he'd been under the blankets still. He bore Niels' sword and charged the enemy, still naked. Eric slammed into a man's shield, taking an axe blade, bad in the ribs, but still managing to climb over the edge of the shield and striking down with the sword and killing the man. An arrow then hit him in the chest and sent him down. Go, Hvitbjorn said, and they turned to fly at great speed from the camp. There were horses, as Stephanos had indicated, on the far side of the camp and they each took one. Hvitbjorn lamented that he had to leave so many behind, but they'd never get free if they tried to take them. Niels was cradling his right hand, but managed to pull himself up onto the horse and set off at a hurried gallop. Ragnar and Stephanos hoisted themselves into the saddle as well and took off. Hvitbjorn pulled himself up onto a powerful black stallion and spared a look back. And there he saw him, walking calmly through the forest, the chaos and death, ordering men to slay the wounded without mercy, was the commander. Atop his head he wore a brilliant golden jewel-encrusted crown, and about him were flowing robes of purple and red. He took in the scene of victory with impassivity, and then looked at Hvitbjorn, astride his horse in the distance. White Bear and Harald Sigurdsson stared at each other a moment. He turned and kicked the horse to a blinding pace until he met the others, and the four all sped from the battle behind them as far as they could, each with a tear for the total destruction of their friends and the way of the life that they had come to know. They rode hard as long as they could, pushing the horses remorselessly. The sounds of war were gone from their hearing, but they knew that they'd left horses behind, and so the odds of being chased were too great to ignore. The horses were each breathing in great resonant grunts by the time they slowed. Within the forest, they came to a road and turned right to carry on south, to ride along for a time. Road, this must be some highway, Niels said. They each allowed their horses a moment to breathe. We go north. You think then, Ragnar said. No, south. There will be better places to recuperate ourselves down there, Niels countered. I think Niels is right, Hvitbjorn dismounted, and walked back to the place where they'd come out of the trees. What are you doing? I need to know where this was. He pulled out his sword and hacked down a small tree, one that stood not taller than twice his height. Then he placed this across the highway. Why should you need to know where this is? I do. I just do. Let's go now. We've stayed here too long. After some time, they found a place through the trees on their left, where a large rock was visible. They went to investigate it and found that beyond the corner there was a small clearing to camp in where the sides of the stone would serve perfectly to protect them from the view of the dirt road and let the horses rest. Once a camp was made, a fire flickering to fight off the chill, each had a moment to sit and take a rest from their panicked flight. They breathed hard still, though not as hard as the horses. God, they're all dead, Ragnar said. Not much we can do about that now. It was my fault. It was my damn fault, Hvitbjorn said, shaking his head. You can't blame yourself, laddie. I saw you trying to run off and kill as many of the bastards as you could. There's now but to carry on. We lived. He shrugged. I let them all die. Theirs was a life of glory and revelry before that. Everyone has to die. But the time that they spent with you before the death was like damn well worth fucking living, Niels said angrily. There was still pain in his voice as he spoke. I loved those warriors, folk of ours. They will not let you disrespect their deaths with lament. Oh, let's have that sleeve off you, laddie. We need to see what's being cut there. They live well, Stephanos said, and they die in glory. Niels, grimacing, peeled up the sleeve. Blood dripped out from the wound, and Ragnar poured some water from his skin to clear it away. Damn, it's fucking cold, Niels said. I know. Oh, it's nae bad. The blade's gone through the outer bone of your arm here on the pinky side, and the hand will stay there. The blade had cut through the half of his forearm, closer to the wrist, and he was bleeding more freely now. I feel like I let out too much blood. You may have done, laddie. It's through an important vein here. Yeah, we'll need it closed up if we're to be saving you. Good job you kept her closed up in the sleeve. Lord the Bear, what we do? Asked Stephanos. We stay here tonight. Hvitbjorn looked up. It won't be dark a long time, but I think we're all tired enough to rest and the horses need sleep. Did anyone take food for them? Stephanos stood to go and gather sticks together to keep the fire. I think there is some in my saddlebag, Niels said. Hvitbjorn stood now, walked over and peered around the boulder. Here he stood there, stared out at the ancient road through the trees, facing away from everyone. They'd done well enough to hide their tracks, and none thought that they'd be discovered in the night. I need to go back, he said more to himself than anything. None could hear him. Ragnar finished wrapping Niels' hand and went about helping Stephanos with the fire. I could really do with a drink. We need to search the saddlebags and see what we have in the provisions. I think you need to get sleep for tonight, laddie. You're looking a wee touch pale there. Maybe sleep is a good idea, Niels said, breathing heavily. Maybe I'll sleep. Stephanos went to the horses he'd been riding and rifled through the bags. I found the mead, Stephanos said. Oh, thank fucking God. Everyone turned and... Oh, thank fucking God. Everyone turned and gawked at Ragnar. He shrugged. Give her here. I need a fucking drink. End of chapter 35. Yeah. Bittersweet one, but what do you expect? Harold Sigurdsson is king now. His power and effect is going to be felt throughout the land. And the warriors did not know. They had no idea. We'll do next episode soon. And thank you all for listening. Always a good time.